Today we're going to be working on differentiating an English lesson plan for someone with a learning disability. In a standard English language arts lesson plan, a do now is usually utilized to activate background knowledge from a previous lesson or introduce new knowledge from the upcoming lesson. It's usually a brief writing assignment with a prompt written on the board that students have a few minutes to complete. At the end, these do-nows are discussed amongst the classroom. Our learning disability that we are studying today, dysgraphia, is characterized by a difficulty with writing. So when we're looking at something like a do-now, we have to differentiate the lesson plan to help someone that would find it challenging to complete most do-nows. Here's an example of a do now activity that gives you a choice of which question you'd like to spend a paragraph answering. Usually these do nows would consist of a few sentences, maybe 4 to 6 sentences, and both of these questions are pretty simple and pretty personal, so most students would have a pretty easy time responding to them. However, to demonstrate what it would be like to complete these do nows as someone with dysgraphia, it would be more appropriate to try to answer these questions in, say, under 3 minutes. It becomes a little bit more difficult when you're required to answer in under a certain amount of time, especially something as small as 3 minutes. Now, add to this 3-minute time limit the enforcement that you have to use only your left hand or your non-dominant hand. How many questions do you think you'd be able to complete during that time period? It would be much less. Let's take a look at what Katrice's attempt to do that looked like.
For the purposes of this experiment, I set a timer on my phone for 3 minutes before I began answering the question for Do Now Option 1 about my favorite subject. I've always written with my right hand and I am in no way ambidextrous. After 3 minutes, this is what I managed to complete before the time ran out. This is the end result of an attempt to answer Do Now Option 2 using my non-dominant hand, which is my left hand. Now, I'm a student that never hesitated to give a long list of reasons why I hated math, which means that usually I would have no problem writing a lengthy response to this question. But as the 3-minute timer winded down, I found myself struggling to think of what I wanted to write because most of my focus was on trying to make my writing legible for someone else to read. My struggles with completing the do now stem from attempting to write with my non-dominant hand. But what if this wasn't the reason that writing a response was difficult for me? What if no matter which hand I wrote with, it still took me 3 times as long as the average student to answer any of these questions? And what about when I have to jot down notes during my class lectures? What if a cognitive disability meant it would take me twice as long to figure out what I wanted to say, how to put my answer into words, and then write my response in a timely manner with proper grammar and spelling, and with handwriting that is legible enough for my teacher to read it? This experiment offers a glimpse into the struggles that students with the disability dysgraphia face. Dysgraphia is classified as a neurological disorder. It is a language-based learning disability that affects students' ability to produce written language. An elementary school student with dysgraphia may have difficulty with consistent letter formation, word spacing, punctuation, and capitalization. However, at a higher grade level, such as the grade for our general education lesson plan, a student with dysgraphia may have difficulty with writing fluency, floating margins, and writing legibly. All of these challenges would make it difficult, if not impossible, for the student in question to take notes during a lesson, to complete an in-class midterm essay, as well as many other typical assessments and assignments required within an ELA general education classroom. These are the students who could be labeled or accused of being sloppy or lazy, when the truth is that there is a neurological disconnect between their brain and the pen and paper in front of them. Dysgraphia makes analysis and discussion while writing extremely difficult.
The student that we're going to be differentiating our English lesson plan for is Isabella. Isabella is a 15-year-old high school student. She loves to sing, and she also loves to perform her spoken word poetry. Isabella is very sociable and communicative with her classmates. She enjoys contributing to open class discussions and brainstorming ideas. Her struggles begin when she is required to copy down notes from lectures, slides, or other students. She has difficulty copying these notes in a time-oriented fashion. Isabella struggles to ask for help due to embarrassment or other such reasons, and due to this, she sometimes struggles to complete her assignments. Isabella is on an IEP for dysgraphia, and that's what we're going to be organizing our lesson plan around. In order to differentiate our ELA lesson plan for Isabella's needs, we're going to be using 3 specific UDL or Universal Design for Learning strategies. The first UDL strategy that we're going to be using is UDL 6.3, which facilitates managing information and resources. This UDL strategy provides multiple means of action and expression that support students' ability to learn new content by teaching key vocabulary, asking questions that stimulates thinking, and making links between the text and the student's own experiences. Another strategy that we're going to be using is UDL 8.2, which requires varying demands and resources to optimize challenges. UDL 8.2 asks us to vary demands and provide multiple means of engagement that actively engage students' attention and provide more than one mode of instruction for the students in the same lesson plan. Lastly, we're going to look at UDL 1.1, which offers ways of customizing the display of information. It instructs teachers to offer multiple ways of the students consuming the information. So that could be the lecture slides, as well as a graphic organizer or other such methods for students to consume the material put forth during the lesson plan. For the purpose of this lesson plan, we will be creating a lesson that is designed for a 9th grade English Language Arts or English Literature classroom. Again, the subject matter will relate to Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, and this mini lesson would organize itself as probably the 2nd or 3rd lesson that takes place within Pride and Prejudice. So, for the purpose of this demonstration, students will have already read the assigned text, completed summaries of various scenes and characters and important themes, and completed previous homework from previous lessons. The goal of this lesson is to help prepare students for eventual assessment that will test their attention and comprehension of Jane Austen's work. This assessment will take the form of a 3 to 5 page essay on a thesis statement that was pre-approved by an instructor.
The instructional objectives for our English lesson plan are as follows. Students will examine the role that social class, gender, and marriage played in society during the Victorian era in Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. Students will be able to identify and analyze the ways in which Elizabeth Bennet defied the societal norms and expectations of Victorian era women. The Common Core standards that are addressed by these objectives are RL 9, 10.1, and RL 9, 10.2. Cite strong and thorough textual evidence to support analysis of what the text says explicitly, as well as inferences drawn from the text. Determine a theme or central idea of a text and analyze in detail its development over the course of the text, including how it emerges and is shaped and refined by details. Provide an objective summary of the text. Observe the graphic organizer demo illustrated here. This is an example or a sample of the information that students are tasked with compiling collectively and eventually on their own over the course of the lesson. Our lesson plan is designed using the I do, we do, and you do modality. For this lesson in particular, students are to actively participate during the I do step. Students will join me in listing societal norms featured in Pride and Prejudice that fall under the category of social class, marriage, or gender roles. At this point, students are welcome to call out answers, which is something that might be distracting for a student with dysgraphia who is trying to jot down the answers. This is a scenario where Isabella's class participation grade wouldn't be impacted because we're aware of her challenges with talking, listening, and writing simultaneously. After writing down 2 or 3 norms for each category as a class, students will be broken up into groups. In groups, students will finish filling up the columns for each category while briefly discussing each norm amongst themselves. This lesson's independent practice, or you do, tasks students with providing a written response to one of the following prompts. Pick one Victorian-era societal norm mentioned in today's lesson that you believe still exists today. Explain why you think this norm still exists and or why you don't agree with it. Or, do you find Elizabeth Bennet's defiance towards society's expectations of her relatable? Why or why not? Explain your answer by using examples from the text and your own experience. This independent practice will serve as an assessment for student and teacher. This activity will be collected at the end of class so that I can assess how well our students are retaining important details and how well they understand the important themes. This will also likely be the lesson in our unit that is shortly followed by an in-class exam, an essay, which is why the homework listed for this lesson is for students to study and pick a thesis statement for an essay topic they like to choose for Pride and Prejudice.
Let's take a second here to reflect on the general education lesson plan that we put forth and how this relates to Isabella's dysgraphia and the way that we differentiated for it. So, our general education lesson plan, as with many general education lesson plans related to literature, require the students take notes and analyze parts of the text with themselves and their classmates as we go along. As we are analyzing, students are discussing with each other and with instructors about important themes, historical contexts, characters, writing styles, and more. They are expected to think about the text, discuss the text at length in groups and independently. In their independent practice, which will be collected at the end of class, they are required to write a paragraph that demonstrates their comprehension, their ability to read the novel, and its relation to historical context and societal norms, of which we are focusing on today. In terms of Isabella's dysgraphia, many of these aspects may be found more difficult. In terms of discussion and communicating with classmates, Isabella is able to communicate effectively. However, her dysgraphia makes writing legibly a challenge, especially when she's put under a time constraint, as well as being required to write a large amount of information and organizing that material from her thoughts into the paper that is going to be handed in. Our lesson plan for Isabella was differentiated through 3 evidence-based strategies that we touched on earlier. The first of these 3 strategies is Universal Design for Learning Strategy 1.1 from our textbook, which involves including reference materials for the student to look at while completing the assignment. Providing reference materials could mean anything from certain vocabulary sheets, vocabulary previews, a dictionary, a thesaurus, or an encyclopedia. Something like a vocabulary sheet would be tailor-made for the student, and this could include a vocabulary preview of certain words that they might come across in the text and help them so that the text is not quite as intimidating while they're consuming it. These materials make it students easier to engage with the information, to communicate with their classmates about the text that they are reading, as well as to transfer information more effectively. The second strategy that we touched on earlier that we are going to go over again is UDL 8.2, which is modified or alternative assignments. This could involve changing the due date of the assignment so that the student has more time and they don't feel quite as rushed. Another one could be providing more in-class time to discuss, or even changing the way in which master-oriented feedback or different strategies to assess the rate of learning. So while some students may be forced to put in a paragraph, and that is the only way that their learning capabilities or effectiveness has been judged for the lesson, another way to accommodate for this or alternate or differentiate the assignment would be for students to communicate with teachers, and the instructor is able to differentiate and assess how much progress they're making instead of being forced to write down exactly in the way that Isabella struggles with. Use of this strategy can also mean making significant changes in the way that the assignment is formatted, and this way it doesn't hinder their ability to engage the material. They can speak about it, they can discuss with someone else, and they're not forced to be intimidated by writing something down. The last evidence-based strategy that we're using for Isabella is UDL 1.1, which is using online tools. There are various education websites, apps, and software that can be an effective way to monitor and foster student engagement, and this is particularly for learning disabled students who may need to differentiate the assignment and lesson plan and provide a much wider, more effective guided practice. Online tools can also provide incentives, especially if it's formatted in the way of a game and they're receiving a score. And again, this could improve engagement and help students transfer information from the lesson better. In the concrete ways that we use these previous evidence-based strategies and universal designs for learning. In terms of our reference materials, Isabella will be provided with a printed or PDF copy of the lecture notes. Immediately, this will help Isabella's dysgraphia because she won't be required to copy vehement notes as the teacher is speaking, which is something that she can struggle with, and that way she can focus on engaging and transferring the information rather than being worried or intimidated about the prospect of writing a lot of information down. Isabella will have a computer or tablet to take her own notes, and in this way some assistive technology can be used on the keyboard, and she will be encouraged to have better attention of the information, and she can reasonably pass the upcoming quiz and essay assignment for Pride and Prejudice. Lastly, Isabella will have a graphic organizer app to help her compile and organize all of the important themes, summaries, and quotes from Pride and Prejudice. For the modified or alternative method of assigning, to differentiate in terms of that aspect, instead of the independent practice exit ticket that is required where students are writing a paragraph or a page about the societal norms that they found in Pride and Prejudice, Isabella can have the option of emailing the assignment later, typing up her answer, and bringing it next class. We can also take into account the fact that if we have a conversation with Isabella about the material and we see that there has been a good amount of progress made in terms of her knowledge, this can go into her grading. All of her grading does not necessarily need to be the written product. And lastly, the online tools that we use, for the quiz as well, it will be mostly fill-in, true or false, or matching, and a more simple assessment and not require quite as much writing. This is another way to differentiate the assignment and modify it to work with Isabella's learning disability. And lastly, we can use online tools. So Poplet is a great graphic organizer, and that's the app that Isabella will use. And Quizlet is another way to organize her thoughts and preview some of the information that she's going to be discovering in the text. And that way, with the prompts used on Quizlet, she will not be forced to write entire thoughts, and the beginning of her thoughts can be kick-started by the use of that online tool.
Let's take a quick look at the apps Isabella will be using. First up, we have Poplet. Poplet is an easy-to-use brainstorming app that helps students develop stronger organizational memory and writing skills. Popplet is compatible as an app for iPad, iPhone, and most computers. Here is a sample of what a graphic organizer design would look like for Pride and Prejudice. I've already added some boxes with mostly text, but with Popplet you can also embed YouTube videos, images, and even draw circles around certain boxes in order to highlight importance. Quizlet is an online app that teachers often use to create quizzes for in-person and remote learning. Quizlet gives students and instructors the option of study guides with true or false questions, short answer, and more for free. In order to complete our presentation and the lesson plan, we use the following resources. And that's the lesson. Thank you for watching.